everyone. Here is a look at the telephones I have set up in this house as of February 26th, 2025. So first, I really haven't done but one or two of this type of video ever before, and I think it's been about a year at least since I have done any. And that's mainly because I just never really remembered to. For one thing, I always felt like different places where I had phones set up weren't really a good spot. It was just kind of temporarily there. Plus, sometimes there was extra disorganization or things in progress, and I just didn't feel like it was presentable enough. But probably that didn't matter as much as I thought it did, and I probably should have recorded those videos back then throughout the getting close to 3 years now since I started my YouTube channel. But I didn't record them, so here we are. So first off, we've got the Cortelco 2500. And this telephone was the first phone I ever bought for my phone collection. It was not the first one I had in my collection, and that's because I found one corded phone in my mother's studio room and 2 Trimlines in the basement about a month before I got this. But at the time, I had visions of creating my own, sort of like my own PBX system actually. I didn't even know those were a thing, but I had wanted to make my own home PBX, and I thought this 2500, after finding it on the Home Depot website, would be the perfect phone for my own operator phone. So I bought it. I'm honestly very glad that I chose the version I did, because these Cortelco phones have a multitude of different versions. For one thing, I like just the basic simplicity of a 2500 without anything like a flash button or a voicemail waiting light or any extra features or anything. Now this one does have volume control, and I actually don't think it's plugged in right now for some reason. But anyway, it's just a nice basic phone, and I happened to choose the version that was made in USA. I don't remember if I found out how to tell which version that was at that time, but I know I wanted to get the more expensive one because I figured it would probably be better quality, and that is indeed the case, I think. I never got any of the fully made in China versions of these, but I do know that the ringers on those sound totally different. Personally, I have to say that the Bell ringers tend to have 2 different speeds. There's like a standard slower one, which I believe goes at the standard 20 Hz that the phone line ringing signal provides, and that's what all the vintage Western Electric dual gong ringers tended to use. And then there's the newer, not new, but newer, faster double bell ringers. I have one phone that has that, which is a Radio Shack Trimline. I believe the model is 43-582. But I also know that from videos that I've seen, these Cortelco 2500s have the made in China versions with those ringers, whereas this one has the regular slow sounding ringer. And personally, I vastly prefer that to the fast ones. I don't know why, but the fast ones, in addition to being extra shrill, they just sound like some kind of cheap knockoff to me. I don't know why. But I even looked out with the pitch of this ringer. It sounds like one of the vintage Western Electric phones. It seems like not too many phones from the 80s or later managed to replicate the old style of the exact pitches of both bells, but I think this one sounds really good. Now, I did actually have to repair the ringer after I got this. I can't remember how long afterwards exactly that was, but I think it was a month or 2. I discovered through reading reviews that these phones have a tendency to get the ring mechanism messed up during shipping. After opening it up and spending an inordinate amount of time staring at all the wires and components, I discovered that inside of here, the mechanism that allows the bells to ring is basically an electromagnetically controlled ball that oscillates back and forth between the bells. And there's this little magnetic cube underneath there, and that had gotten slid out of place. So I just stuck a screwdriver in there and slid it to the other side of its groove, and that fixed it. When I first got this phone, only the lower pitched bell rang, and when I put it on the lower volume control level for the ringer, it was basically just a tapping sound. So now it works, and it works quite well. This has to be one of my favorite phones. Now moving over to the right, we have a Bell Phones by Northwestern Bell Phones, also known as a directional or Direction Bell Ding Bell Phones, model 77230-4. This is a combination caller ID box and speakerphone device. And the reason I got this was because about a year and a half prior, or no, 2.5 years prior, I had gotten a Bell South, aka Direction Bell Ding, model model CI7112, and that had a speaker, but no speakerphone, because it had a whole suite of buttons for controlling your voicemail system. It's called the Bell South Visual Director, and I thought it was a really neat device, because thanks to those labeled buttons that automatically dial the correct digits depending on what function you want to activate according to the button labels, it basically turns a voicemail system into a slightly time-delayed answering machine. That's how simple it is to use. And that one happens to have one of the best telephone line speakers I've ever heard. But unfortunately it has no microphone, so I can't use it as a speakerphone. So when I found this one for sale, this Northwestern Bell Phones unit for sale, I decided I wanted to try it out, because it has an actual speakerphone. And unfortunately I don't think it is plugged in either, but I'll check it out. Oh, no, it is. Nice. So as you heard, it's got a great range of volume, and the audio quality is not too bad. I was pleasantly surprised with the performance of this speakerphone, and the unit as a whole at first, at least. Even the microphone has very good pickup, which is kind of astonishing. And the display here, let me tilt it so you can see it better. It's got very good contrast. It's a nice big display, easy to read. It stores 95 calls, and it's got the date and time, as most caller ID boxes have. But unfortunately, there are two major flaws with this unit. First, half the time, it just doesn't work. I don't know why, but for half the phone calls we get, I look over at this thing and it says line error or something to that effect. I don't think it could be because I have other phones on the line, because I don't think caller ID is a kind of thing where the more phones are taking it, or it's not like the line voltage, where when certain phones are off hook, they all have to share the voltage. I don't think it's that way, so I don't know why it's giving all these errors. But more importantly, even if it did work flawlessly, it does not have call waiting ID, also known as Type 2 caller ID. And that was my main reason for getting this, in addition to the speakerphone, of course. I have several caller ID boxes, and really the only use case for those that I have is for plugging them into non-caller ID phones like this 2500, so that when I'm already using the phone and a call waiting comes in, I can see who it is and not have to just ignore it for risk of it being a spam. I obviously don't need Type 1 caller ID on all my phones because, for one thing, I have just so many that I can always find one to look at. But also, I always try to have at least a few with personal ringers and talking caller ID, so I don't even need to see a screen at all when the phones are ringing. But of course, when there's a call waiting, there's only going to be one phone that can receive that, since it would be just one phone that's in use. And I have noticed when multiple phones are in use and a call waiting comes in, call waiting ID does not work properly on them. So, these caller ID boxes I like to get are only useful for me for providing Type 2 caller ID or call waiting ID to certain of my non-caller ID phones. The non-caller ID cordless phones, pretty much with those, all bets are off, especially with the older 900 megahertz ones without a screen. Since those have such good range, I may well be outside with them. But for corded phones, I definitely want to have call waiting ID, and this box doesn't supply it, so really its only function is a standalone speakerphone unit for me right now. Next up, also in the bedroom, I have an AT&T Trimline 400 from 1986. And this is a phone that my grandmother, more specifically my step-grandmother, but she's been my step-grandmother for more than twice the time that I've been alive. She got this probably in the mid-80s, and it apparently got put into their basement storage room a long time ago, and was just not used for who knows how many years. So it was extremely dirty and dusty when I got it, but she thought I might want to have it since it was an old phone, and I sure did, and it really has been a nice phone. I managed to get it cleaned up very well, I think, even though this was only the second ever dirty telephone that I got, and it really only has one major problem, which is the forgetful memory. It has 3 memory buttons, which are all one-touch memory, and no matter what I try to program into them, they always just reset into some kind of random string of digits and digit length pauses, not regular pauses. It's really odd. The best part about that, though, is that often it almost sounds like some kind of jaunty song that it comes up with. I'll have to record some of those sometime. But other than that, it's got a great ringer, the classic AT&T chirp ringer, and it has weights in the handset and base, very sticky, high-friction rubber feet on the base. It wall mounts just fine, and even though it's heavily yellowed, it doesn't have too much wear, so it's a nice phone. And also over here I've got, on top of the boombox, a Uniden TCX800, but we'll get to the story of that in the other room when I get over to the base. Next up, in the bathroom, or more specifically the sink room, since this is a so-called Jack and Jill bathroom, we have a Uniden DWX1160 waterproof submersible cordless telephone. This is the first ever Uniden waterproof that I got. They are pretty hard to find. I've since gotten 2 others, another just like this, except it did come with the belt clip and didn't come with the original power supply. And also the, WXI477. Anyway, with this one, I decided to install it in the bathroom because I don't need the belt clip, and the replacement power supply I got for the other one has multiple different connections on the plug in order to get the right kind of plug for this base, for this charger. So I thought it'd be less water resistant, and this one would be the better one for the bathroom. And I really like these Uniden waterproof phones, not just because they're waterproof, but because of how sturdy they are. They're dust resistant, they work really well, they have those rubber grips, and they're a nice large phone, they feel great in your hand. They've got a great weight to them. They're just really nice all-around telephones. And I didn't have this in my bathroom for a long time, but after getting it cleaned up and reorganized recently, I decided to put it in here, and I'm probably going to keep it in here for the foreseeable future. Now in the workroom, we've got, well, up front, a Uniden Win1200. This back here is a base to the Panasonic KXTG2620 with the broken screen handset, but that base is currently holding up a weather radio antenna. Anyway, the Win1200, as you can see, is not in a great state right now, and that's because the original battery that came with this phone had leaked, and thankfully, since it was a brand new in the box phone, the battery was not plugged into the phone, but I didn't realize it had leaked, and so I got it out of its bag and was trying to put it in and everything. So I just wanted to get this phone cleaned up a bit more after I would have probably spread some of those corrosive... It wasn't quite like liquid at that point, it was just a bunch of little... Not even like powder, I don't know what to describe it as, but anyway, I'd rather just get this phone wiped off with some vinegar before I actually use it. But it's here, and it's the Win1200. I can't believe I got one of these, brand new in the box. This is going to be really awesome once I get it cleaned up. And on the same table, we have the Uniden DWX1160 base. This was the first ever Uniden cordless phone I got, and the first telephone I found at a thrift store. Unfortunately, it didn't come with a power supply, and the battery it came with was spoiled. So between having to buy... Well, actually, I tried buying several different power supplies, but had to return them all because they just kept giving it a horrible buzzing sound. But eventually, about 2 years later, I managed to find one that works with this phone at that same thrift store. Anyway, between having to buy those extra things for this, it turned out to be about as expensive as the one I was going to buy online around the same time I found this. Although actually, I think the power supply I found at the thrift store later on was a good bit cheaper than any of the others, so probably it was still a better deal. But anyway, the headset's not here right now because it needs to be fully disassembled and cleaned. I cleaned it as best as I could at the time that I got it, but it still has some kind of weird gunk in the buttons and on the screen, and since I got it, I've learned how to disassemble and clean phones, so I'll be doing that at some point. But this is what the DWX207 is registered to, although I think that one is also registered to the 1588 base. I know that one came with its regular 5 handsets, which are the colorful ones plus 2 black ones. And these DECT 6 phones, or at least the first generation ones from Uniden, hold up to 6 handsets usually. And I always like to have one of the waterproof phones registered on the 1588 because it has so much better range than the 1580 base. But since the 1588 is a lot bigger and bulkier, and the base speakerphone, in terms of the outgoing audio, just isn't really usable, this is the one that I have out right now and registered to the DWX207 because it does at least work well enough. Over here, at kind of an awkward angle, unfortunately, is the Uniden Shrew 9485, or TRU 9485. I found this at a thrift store, not brand new in the box, but with the box, and wall mount bracket, and it came with the handset and its belt clip, and also in their boxes, 2 TCX 905s, with their belt clips and everything. The whole system was pretty heavily used though. So, as you can see, I don't have a handset in there, and that's because they've given me some trouble with cleaning them up, but I think I'm almost done with them now. And I had been using this as the testing phone until I got my TRU or True 9496 cleaned up, because that one was giving me a lot of trouble. There's some kind of weird residue all over the receiver and on part of the base on that one. But I think I figured out a way to clean that off. So I stopped using this as the testing phone for now. But it's here still, and it is a very cool phone. I have to say, compared to the true 8885, it has some interesting differences, including a lack of some of the super advanced features, as you might call them, like the animation screen. I can't remember some of the others, but it actually has some others that are more advanced than the 8885. It's interesting. It's like the 8885 was kind of going for more gimmicky features, and the 9485 is going for more extra telephone-related features. So I think they are both pretty good in their own way. And speaking of the 8885, here it is, right up here. And this one that I got was my first ever Uniden True System, and in fact first 5.8 gigahertz phone of any kind. And I really have enjoyed using this a lot. I used to use it as my testing phone. And in fact, I'd say the answering machine sounds better than the 9485, probably mainly because the speaker in the bass is a lot better. But overall, this is just a really nice phone, both of them are. And yeah, I guess that's about it for those Trues. And finally, over here, we've got a phone mate, not made by Casio, but just regular phone mate, model 9870 from 1993. This was a phone that I found at a thrift store in the, I guess I could call it somewhat rural, not really that rural, but still not urbanized, North Carolina mountains. So I expected to find some interesting things there, and here is indeed one. I also got an AT&T 1306 there. But this 9870 has to be one of my favorite phones of all time. For one thing, it came with both original tapes. It is a dual cassette tape answering machine, and one of them had the original greeting on there, which was a nice sounding one, and the other one had quite a lot of old messages on there. I think probably 20 to 30 minutes of old messages. I lost one of the recordings for those, but I don't think it's gone. I just misplaced it, and I never actually re-recorded that tape. So once I find a micro cassette player, I should be able to just play that tape and record it with proper audio. But I will go ahead and say some of those messages were really cool. They had people talking for 2 or 3 minutes in their message. They had all kinds of old telephone hang-up sounds, including cordless phone data transmission sounds I'd never heard before, and various corded phone hang-up sounds. And I think there were even a couple calling from old cell phones, because they didn't have any kind of a hang-up sound at all. Or perhaps they were a digital or digitan cordless phone, one of the very early ones. I'm not sure when this phone would have stopped being used. Now this phone has some really neat features. One of those is that it can automatically call up a phone number you program into a specific location in memory anytime you get a new message. So like if you wanted to monitor on your cell phone when you were away from home for new messages on your home line, you could just turn on the message transfer mode, and 1 minute after you get a new message on here, this phone will call up your cell phone, and when you say hello, it'll say, "Hello, you have new messages, please enter remote code." And once you do that, it'll play them. It's just really cool. And since this is a 2-line phone, you can of course customize the greetings and lines that it uses to answer. And I have to say, the synthesized voice on this phone is one of my absolute favorite synthesized voices of all time. It's a really nice sounding one, And it's a really iconic sounding one, I think, too, because of just how old it is. I'll go ahead and play you some of the things that it says in just a minute. I will say for now, this phone, since it didn't come with the manual, and it is so rare that I can't find any information about it online, I think I'm going to have to make a very long video explaining everything there is that I know about this phone. And I may well do that for several others in my collection that I couldn't find any information on. That was one main purpose for starting this YouTube channel, after all. So now let's listen to that voice.
Wednesday, 12:09 p.m.
Probably wasn't quite loud enough. Let me turn it up.
Wednesday, 12:09 p.m.
It was a little distorted. Let's see.
Greeting 2 to line 1. Greeting 2 to line 2. Greeting 2 to no line. Greeting 2 to line 1. Greeting 2 to line 2. I will replay messages.
Oh, no, it doesn't actually have any on there. I'll just stop it. Oh, I didn't. Okay. Yeah, I forgot it says stuff. It's interesting because this machine talks about itself in the first person.
Hello, you have one message.
And sometimes it'll say, "1 moment, please."
I will save messages.
So overall, this phone is a really fascinating and enjoyable to use piece of equipment. Over here on the desk, I've got the Panasonic KXTG9344T. And technically, I guess this is functioning like a 9341 right now because I don't have but one of the handsets with it. Well, I mean, I have the others. They're just not in use right now. And in fact, this one's out of charge. So the 9341 system was, I believe, one that my family had back in the late 2000s to early 2010s. It just seems familiar. I don't remember exactly, but it seemed familiar enough that when I found one with 4 handsets and with the box, and I think it was for a total price of about $40 or so, because at that time I was not as choicey with my telephone prices that I was willing to pay, I decided to get this one, and it has been a good system overall, except for the speakerphones. On all 5 of the speakerphones, the outgoing audio does not sound too good. The pickup is pretty weak, and in fact on one, it seems that in the time since I got it, it's developed somewhat of a gain control issue, which is very unfortunate. It really seems like a lot of these Panasonic phones just don't stand the test of time as well as the Unidens. Then again, neither did the AT&Ts or VTECs on average. But this phone is still a good one, and the range on it is quite impressive. It's an early DECT 6 phone. It's still using Panasonic's small form factor handset, as I call it. And it's got a range boost, which I believe comes on automatically, although for some reason it's not advertised on the phone itself. And that seems to work pretty well. It gives great coverage throughout the whole yard, which is not too common. Our yard's not huge, but especially with all the smaller trees and shrubs and bushes that are everywhere, and the big house with thick brick walls, it's not too common for my phones to give full coverage of the yard, but this one does so with the range extender. And it's actually, at the time that I got it, was the first ever Panasonic cordless phone in my collection. And lastly, down here in the living room, I have a Panasonic KXTC1703B. I got this phone as a Christmas gift from my grandmother, actually the same one who gave me her old Trimline 400, and it came with the box. I have yet to do a checkout on it because of the testing phone confusion as of late, but it is a pretty nice phone. I tried to get a KXTC1723B, which is the 2-line version of this telephone, back in August 2022, and unfortunately it came with the wrong power supply, and that kind of melted a coil inside of the base when I tried to plug it in. Now thankfully I was able to mail that phone to a friend of mine by the name of Rod Ardvin Electrics, and he was able to fix it, and he even figured out what was wrong with it because I couldn't figure it out. And at that time, he also mailed me a brand new in the box 1723 that he found on eBay for me, since they seem to be much more common where he lives in Canada. And I'm really grateful to him for that. But sadly, on that one, the screen doesn't work. As I was saying about these Panasonics not really standing the test of time as well as Unidens, the 1723 was made between 2001 and 2002 or 3, I think. And the one that I got from Rod was from 2002 and sold in 03. It was made in late 2002. So at that time, they had apparently switched to the lower quality screens, and it just doesn't work. And in fact, I think it just doesn't work at all now. It was kind of flickering on and off very rapidly, but now it doesn't seem to want to turn on at all. Well, I mean, the phone turns on, but the screen doesn't. So this phone, the 1703, works just fine. It was made in 2001, and as you can see... Oh, whoops. I was pressing the wrong button. Well, it works just fine. And it is still a pretty neat phone. Certainly a neat looking one. And it's a 900 megahertz digital one, which, not counting the 1723s, is the first non-analog or DSS 900 megahertz phone in my collection. And the range on it is not bad, but it's really not much better than most of the analogs. In fact, my extended range Uniden EXT1160 seems to have better range than this one. I think that's because it uses the analog signal, which is more so vulnerable to places where the signal just gets completely blocked, as opposed to places where the signal is degraded, which will cause the digital signal to become somewhat corrupted. But anyway, like I said, this one is a great phone, and it does actually have handset speakerphone, which is very rare on 900 megahertz phones. That's why I've been trying to get either the 1723 or the 1703 or something like this for so long. And unfortunately, the outgoing audio, as is typical with most of the older Panasonic cordless phones, is not very good, but it does work if you hold it up within a few inches of your mouth, and it works just fine at that distance. And the incoming audio can be turned down nice and quiet or go blastingly loud. And this phone does have a headset jack and belt clip, which makes it pretty handy to use. So that will be about it for this video of the telephones in the house as of February 26th, 2025. Thank you for watching and listening.